I'll hand it over to Anthony. Thank you.
Thank you. As what was said, I am with a company called CIBT, not to be confused with the bank. We are a separate company altogether. We're not very well known in the Atlantic region, but I have the pleasure of coming to you from a remote office in Moncton, New Brunswick. So hopefully I'm going to try and cover off some of the ins and outs of import-export. I have been in regulatory compliance and international trade for well over 22 years. And have worked in a variety of different roles. What I'm going to try and do is sort of touch on a couple of different areas over the course of the next 45 minutes or so. But because it's a small group, I would encourage you to use chat line or interrupt me. I prefer engaging rather than lecturing. So what I did is I put together some slides on different things that I thought entrepreneurs should be aware of. I do volunteer my time with other associations doing more intense workshops on import-export. But today we're keeping it pretty slim because we didn't really know who was going to show. And as you'll experience in this presentation, there's a lot that you can do depending on what kind of commodity you are shipping. So I'm going to be sharing some stories. I had a regulatory consulting firm here in Moncton for a number of years, and have seen the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to trade export. So I'll share some of that and then some tips and tricks. CIBT, if you Google us, we are involved in compliance for moving people. So we do a lot with business visas. If you were to go to China to meet an importer, you would need a visa. You can do that on your own, or you can get somebody like us to help you with what's required to go to China for that. And then on the other side, we're also on the trade compliance side. So that's the division that I'm working here in Canada with exporters, either on market authorization. So if you're planning to go into a United States as an example, and you think you figured it out, but you'd like a second opinion, you can always reach out to me and we can certainly take a look at that to make sure that you didn't miss anything on your review, as well as helping with some of the trade documents that you might need. Where we add value is rather than you hiring somebody to do the work, we can usually do it faster and more cost effective than you going out and finding somebody to help you with this, or you spending time. I find a lot of entrepreneurs want to do everything on their own, which is great. It keeps costs down, but I've also seen some entrepreneurs who it takes them months to figure out what the regulatory requirements are to move in to a certain country, even just using e-commerce. We can do it probably in much faster than months because we have offices all over the world. So we'll talk a little bit about that later. So what I'm going to cover off in the next hour or so is some export considerations. Again, I'm tailoring this more for startups and entrepreneurs. If you were already an established business, we may I might have tailored it a little bit differently, but a lot of the same things to consider would apply regardless of how long you've been in business. I'm going to talk about the myths and the reality of exporting. We'll talk a little bit about success stories, and then I thought I would give you some tips and tricks on trade shows in other countries. I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to people moving trade shows materials into the United States, as an example, since they are our largest trading partner. And so we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And although I have questions at the end, I would encourage you to ask questions as we go through this, so I don't just hear my voice speaking. What I thought we would do is just talk a little bit about export, some things to consider when you're looking at exporting. The biggest one is, are you looking at selling directly to a business who's going to turn around and sell your products, or are you sending it to what I would call an end consumer, somebody who's like you and I, who will order something on your e-commerce website and then you're going to ship it. Depending on the country that you're shipping it to, there are usually requirements for both commercial, the business to business, as well as the consumer. So in some cases, you might be able to not have to register your products if it's going directly to a consumer. While if you're going to be selling it in a retail shop, you might actually have to get registered, or you might have to have your labeling changed, or. So it is important to figure out who it is that's going to be that you're going to be selling to. It's probably one of the first questions, and I had a person this morning that I had a meeting with here in New Brunswick who's looking at exporting, and first question out of my mouth was who is going to be receiving this in the end, because that's important. Monica had a question. Does that apply to consumables, a non-registration sale to consumers? It depends. So some products, so consumables is a very large group, right? So in some cases, I'll give you an example, ski wax. Ski wax, although it's for skis and it's what you put on the skis to get them moving, do contain ingredients that are regulated in the United States, and that you actually have to register your ski wax in every state before you sell it to a consumer, whether it's the end consumer or a business. Most people don't know that. But if you are exporting out of Canada into the United States, something as simple as ski wax may not necessarily be allowed because of the ingredients that are inside the ski wax. So it is really based on what it is that you're shipping and what it could contain, to see if the agencies, now in the United States is an easy one to go into, but every state has different regulations. So if you said to me that I want to ship my goods into the United States, great. They're close. The cost of fuel won't be as much probably for shipping. However, you have to deal with the federal government, and then each state has its own agency. So you'd actually have to check and make sure that the agency that governs your product doesn't have an issue with what's in it or what is going to be used for. What I mean by that is that after 9/11, the federal government in the United States came out with a pre-notification alert for any products that are consumed by animals or people. So whenever you ship into the United States a product like a food or beverage, or for animals or humans, you're actually obligated to go on to the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration page, and register who it is that you're shipping it to, where is it manufactured, prior to actually shipping it, whether it's by mail or by courier or by truck or however it is. So even people that are shipping small products across the border sometimes still have to register. Why is this important? Because at the end of the day, if you're planning to enter into another market, the last thing you want to be known as is somebody who's not compliant, right? Today, everything is tracked. You can't cross the border without them knowing how many shipments you've shipped into that country. And so if you're not following the rules of that country and you get into their bad books, that can cost you in penalties. They can stop you from shipping into that country. I've seen 10-year bans for the United States because a shipper decided to try to get around not having to pay duties and taxes or follow the rules. And so if you're looking at international trade, it's really important that you take the time to make sure that you're following the rules, because if things go well, and I hope it does, you are able to get more business. And the last thing you want is something to happen where the border security or an agency, also known as other government departments, see you as someone who's non-compliant, because that will mean that every shipment that crosses the border will be pulled aside and checked. And you're going to get billed for them checking your orders to see if they're compliant or not. So it's not worth the long run hassle. The process, of course, regardless of if it's big or small, is basically you're setting up an agreement, whether it's an end consumer on your e-commerce platform or it's to a distributor who's going to carry your stuff, or a retailer, preparing the shipment, getting the documents together, and then sending the shipment, and then receiving it. So although it's a basic outline of the business process, it is important to make sure that you're doing the due diligence. So I'm going to talk about that a lot, because I've seen companies that have attempted to do things wrong get hit with major penalties. You cross the wrong officer at the border who decides that they're having a bad day, and they take it out because you're missing a document. They seize it and they destroy your product, right? There's nothing that you can do at that point. So those are the things that become important that you're taking a look at. And again, you don't need a company like CIBT to do the market authorization. It helps because we know where to look and who to talk to. But it is something that you should be looking at yourself just to make sure that you understand what the requirements are. Valuing your product is also very important. The World Trade Organization actually governs valuation. For entrepreneurs, mostly, you're going to be shipping goods probably at whatever price you're selling it as, and so that's fine. Where this becomes challenging is when you send samples. So if a retailer in the United States wants a sample of your product, a shirt, we'll take the dress shirt that I'm wearing. If I have the dress shirt and I want to send it as a sample, I need to value it not at 2 cents, because I don't want to get hit with duties. I have to value it on a fair market value, which is governed by the World Trade Organization, and it sits in our Customs Act. So it's very important that you don't try and reduce the price to get around having to pay duties and taxes, because that's seen as non-compliant. And there's companies that have gone out of business because they've been caught adjusting their values for a sample that is end product, like a shirt that I can turn around and use right away at 5 cents or 10 cents, right? So you have to be very careful on how you value that, because at some point you will be audited by the government that you're shipping into. And even though the end consumer might be paying for the shipment and the duties and taxes, the last thing that you need is to be seen as non-compliant, because that, again, from a marketing standpoint, you want to be you want to make sure that you're following all the rules and you're valuing your product correctly. So most of you, it won't be an issue, but when you're doing sampling, be very careful, because some companies will try and send you product that is usable. It's the actual product at a reduced price, because they're trying to help you out by not having it come in with duties and taxes. Again, here coming into Canada, if you've got a product that you're bringing in to do something with, you're considered what's called the importer of record, and Revenue Canada will throw the book at you if they find out that you're devaluing that, or the exporter is devaluing that. They're very much into you coming forward and saying, hey, this came in wrong. It should have been this amount. So if you voluntarily go to our border security, CBSA, or the CRA, and you say, hey, there was an error when it came into Canada, they will look favorably on you, because you're trying to make amends to what an issue that happened outside of the country. But if they catch you, they do an audit on you, then you're going to get fined, and then there's penalties and things like that. So valuation is important. There's something called landed costs. So if you are looking at shipping out somewhere, one of the things that you should be considering is, what are you going to sell it for? What's the freight charge going to be on it? Are there duties and taxes that are also something to consider? If the value is big enough or it's regulated, you might have to have a customs broker, a UPS. You could use UPS or FedEx. But those are all things that need to go into what we call the landed costs, so that you know what it's going to cost to get it into that country. And we're going to talk a little bit about foreign currency fluctuations and who's taking on the risk, which is my next slide. But understanding that is very important. So I had a customer a couple of years ago who was shipping out of the US into Canada. He didn't do this. He ships all over the world, but for some reason for Canada, he thought it was going to be, because he's under at that point it was NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. Today it's CUSMA. He thought that there would be no duties or taxes. He was wrong. Coming into Canada for his product, which was a food, he had to pay 5% GST on his stuff. And it turned out that he lost money by agreeing to get it into Canada, that he would pay for all the costs, right? He learned the hard way, where FedEx gave him a bill, which included the GST, and then he turned around and sent it to me and asked me what was going on. In that case, he didn't do his due diligence to figure out what all the costs were going to be, and maybe agreed to a different deal, right? So the Canadian importer maybe could have paid for the duties and taxes. There was no duties, but they could have paid for the taxes, right? You have some control over that when you're negotiating your sales contract. So that brings me to what's known as Incoterms, international commercial terms. Not really something that an entrepreneur would necessarily need to know right now. What's good about it, though, is for you to start to consider who's going to pay for the transportation, who's paying for the duties and taxes, who's going to pay for any additional regulatory exporting requirements. So if you were to ship into, for example, Panama or Costa Rica in Central America, or some other countries in Latin America, South America, you would actually have to consularize, it's called consularize, your documents, which would mean getting it notarized from your Chamber of Commerce, or a lawyer, or CIBT does that as well. Then sending it to Global Affairs in Ottawa, who has to authenticate it, basically validate that these are Canadian documents. And then they need to go to the embassy of the country that you're shipping to have it consularized. That costs money. So the question is, who's paying for that? So if you, again, as you start to explore which country you're going to go into, you might want to consider adding that into your conversation with whoever it is that you're shipping to. If it's a retailer, a lot of companies today are paying for it, but then they're making sure that the importer is the one that is going to get billed with the cost of this, because it's a requirement by that country to get it in. So those are things that, again, I have met companies that have had regulatory departments who never even thought of that. So it's an added cost that some entrepreneurs, usually that are new to exporting, don't necessarily always think about. But those are the kinds of things that we need to start thinking about, because the last thing you want is to lose money on shipping out to another country. The great thing about being in Canada is that we have 15 free trade agreements. So compared to the United States, who only has 3 in the world, we're sitting pretty nice where we are. And so if you're looking for a way to get your products in somewhere that's not going to cost you additional duties, either for yourself or for your consumer or your customer, you might want to look at the free trade agreement. A lot of companies today are looking at Europe, and they're looking at the Trans-Pacific, because Canada is actually on both of those agreements, and you don't have to pay duties for a lot of things that originate here in Canada. And so it may be that going into the United States, although they're close, it may be more regulatory hassle for you, because you'd have to check each state versus going into a country like Australia, or going into Belgium or Netherlands or France. So looking at the free trade agreement, it would be part of your review to see where you should be shipping to. These days, though, you have to consider transportation costs. They're not getting any better, and anyone who's driving around knows the pain at the pumps right now is crazy, and it's not looking like it's getting any better. And that's going to impact your shipping costs going out or coming in. And so those are things to consider as well. You'll probably be spending more time evaluating how to move your goods. If you can use courier or post, those are probably what you're going to be using. But you'll start to see the costs going up for sure.
Anthony, I think Diane has her hand raised. So.
Oh, I can't see anyone.
Yeah.
You'd have to use the actual emoticon in.
Yeah, she did use that.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you
It's
can
not
see
showing
it, but...
on mine.
Oh, okay. I apologize. I just didn't want to interrupt. Sorry.
So just want to make sure I'm clear on something with the landed costs.
Yep.
When you're importing, is duty paid on the landed cost, including all the freight, or just the cost of the products, the price of the products?
Well, it includes, I'm talking about a per unit price. So when it's coming in, you would have to take into account the costs of the duties to be your landed cost before you figure out what your retail is going to be, right?
Oh, maybe I'll ask the question a different way. If it costs me money on freight, I'm paying the freight to bring it into Canada.
Yep.
Do I have to pay duty on the freight?
No.
Okay.
You would only be paying duty on the product. So you would have to know what it's called an HS code. It's a harmonization code that is 10 digits. The first 6 is internationally recognized. So as an example, let's see if I can write here. I'll excuse myself because I'm writing with a mouse on my screen. But if I was moving a leather saddle for a horse into Canada, the tariff code is 42, chapter 4201 00 is the first 6 digits. In Canada, I would have to come up with the last 4 digits because that'll tell me my duties. So every commodity or every product that you can move in the world today has an HS code. And you can have a company like CIBT determine what that code should be, or you can, there are some guidelines that you can actually go and try and figure it out yourself. I used to teach at a private college, and we would run an exercise, and it would take students 7 hours to do one product because it's not easy. And if you get it wrong, you run the risk of not understanding what the duties are going into that country. So in this case, it would be the product. So if the product was $10, maybe freight was $5, just estimation. The duties and taxes would be based on that $10 of the product. We're not adding, like it's not a cumulative. We don't add those together to get your duties and taxes. It would just be by itself on the $10 for the product. Just for the landed cost, you would have to understand what what's called total cost of ownership. So it's taking into account the cost of the duties and taxes to get that product into Canada. And then there's freight on top of that, whatever that costs you. And then if there's a brokerage fee. So some companies will charge $20 to $25 for an order to come into Canada. But it really depends on what it is that you need them to do. Did that answer your question? Oh, you're muted. You're good? All right.
Yeah. I love that table though. I got to tell you, that table's amazing.
This one?
Yeah.
I have it in Excel. So what I can do is I'll share it. I'm going to share the PowerPoint, but I'll also share the Excel spreadsheet, which you can reference.
Yeah, really, I've never seen it this detailed. I was trying to explain to one of our clients, our JEDI clients, about, she was trying to source something from China.
Okay.
And I said to the folks in China, I said, what's the freight? What's the FOB point on this? Like, who's paying the freight? Oh, we'll ship it to your door. I said, no. I need to understand what the shipping terms are here. Like, what's the freight code? oh, we'll ship it to your door in broken English. And I said, like, he should be telling us it's FOB, their port or our port or something. But anyway, this is really good.
Yeah, the key with that is that so the Uniform Commercial Code, which is in the United States, is where you have FOB, free on board, prepaid, or collect.
Yeah.
But when we're talking international terms, that FOB is only for waterway. So if you were shipping a FedEx courier, as an example, you can't use FOB. You could use it, but if there was ever an issue legally, it would be thrown out of the court.
Okay.
So there's a huge risk involved if you don't fully understand the terms, or the most confusing one is FOB, because a lot of North American companies are used to free on board, prepaid, or collect from trucking. And they just assume that Incoterms follows the same way, but it doesn't. So, but going back to your story with China, I did a workshop a few years ago where a company was buying boxes from China, and they had agreed to an ex-works term, which ex-works means that the buyer here in Canada is going to pay for everything from their dock. So this particular company, it was a medium-sized company, was shocked when the exporter contacted them and said, your shipment is ready. You can now organize a container and shipping. And they said, no, you're supposed to be sending it to our dock. No,
Mm-hmm.
That's why it was so cheap.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's a huge part of buying from China is you've got to get all this sorted out.
Yes.
Actually, Monica's got a question here too.
I see that. We're not a broker. CIBT, we do trade compliance activities. So we will assist in determining your HS codes for getting paperwork that you might need submitted to government agencies, especially if we have offices, like we have 2 offices in China. And so we have that ability to hand it directly to government agencies. In some cases, we're working with the customs brokers. So if you were to get a customs broker to handle your freight, and you ask them to come up with the HS code for your product, in some cases, they're getting us to do the last mile. We're actually the ones behind the scenes doing the work, and they're upselling it to you as a service, right? So because we're so big, we do a lot of different things in trade compliance that if you're working with a freight forwarder or a customs broker, they may be charging you X amount of dollars marked up, but we're the ones that are doing the actual work. So, but we can't clear anything into a country. So there's no point in talking to us about customs clearance. But if you're looking for assistance or audits of your trade documents before you get audited, we can certainly do that.
And can you help an entrepreneur get their system and processes set up so that the first shipment they make or the first shipment they receive is done properly?
Yes. So that's sort of part of what we're doing here today is to introduce you that we exist. And the great thing about at least me is that I'm located in New Brunswick. So, I look after all of Canada, but it is helpful for me to be located locally, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yes, if you're looking at what processes that you need in place, in some cases it might just be steering you. I had a question the other day from a medium-sized company in Nova Scotia who was looking for a particular document. And it was they just needed to write on their commercial invoice a statement because they were shipping it into Europe. I'm not going to bill them for that. So I just gave them the statement. I said, that's all you need to do. There's nothing, there's not, we are out to educate and provide some assistance. And if it turns out that it's easier to have us just do it for you when you're shipping out, that's, we can look at that. Or if you need some guidance on that first shipment to make sure that you're doing it right, and then maybe take a look at how you can set it up so you're not scratching your head every time that you ship out. We can help you with that as well.
Okay, good to know.
No problems. I'm just catching up on questions. So free trade, some considerations would be how you're going to get paid. When there are actually multiple ways that you can get paid. Most people think of advance payments or prepaying, or extended credits. So you're going to bill them 30 days after they get the shipments. Of course, there's pros and cons to both those. I always tell people to check with the bank, especially if it's a larger shipment. There may be some other options for that. There's something called a documentary credit and a documentary or a letter of credit and a documentary collection, which is mostly used for ocean freight. If when you get up there and you start looking at different ways to get paid that reduce your risk overall, but the banks can help you with that. Most entrepreneurs or even businesses today that are exporting never talk to their bank. I'm not sure why, but the banks are there to protect your interests as well. And so you can always have a conversation, especially when you start getting into larger value shipments. Mm-hmm. There are protections out there that allow you to ship out and will almost guarantee you the receipt afterwards. There are certain banks, I'm not going to, because this is being recorded, I can't endorse anyone, but there are Canadian banks that if you're shipping out, say, $5,000 worth of goods, you can actually go to them and they can set up what's called a letter of credit, which will require your importer to basically take out a line of credit, like a line of credit, which basically gets frozen. It's a collateral that is kept. And once you ship out, so the day that it leaves Canada, you get paid because it's a guaranteed sale. It's a guaranteed payment under the international monetary. So there are, again, a lot of people don't realize that being in Canada, there actually are a lot of opportunities to safely ship out. And if you're using the bank to help you with that, they are also going to check the credit history of the bank that your importer is at to make sure that there's no risks there. So those are some things to consider. Country risk is also another one. I'm a former freight forwarder instructor, and I can tell you that these are things that you should be considering. So it might be you found a really great retailer in some country that nobody knows exists. That's great, but if they're on the verge of civil war or there's other issues, the best deal in the world may not be the best deal, especially if you lose your product, right? A lot of entrepreneurs and startups can't afford to lose their shipment because they thought that it was a good deal, and it turned out not to be a good deal because they didn't check in with other agencies or even the trade commissioners, or there's actually a lot of support for exporters coming out of Canada today. Foreign exchange is also something to consider. It's shipping to the United States. You're going to be in US dollars, so is the exchange rate worth shipping it at for the value that you're looking for, cost wise or retail wise? Those are things to consider. And then when are you going to get paid off that? Do you run the risk of the currency exchange changing, right? So those are, again, it's things to consider when you're exporting or importing, and the timeline between you setting the agreement and when you're going to get paid, right? What happens if there's a dispute? If, whose law are you under? I'm a big proponent of making sure that in your agreement, especially with businesses, that you have something that says what happens if we have a disagreement. What's the mediation steps? Who do you get involved, right? It might seem ridiculous at the beginning, but you need something there to help you understand what you would do if there was a disagreement, right? Even the best examples of you having a really great relationship with somebody from another country and it would never happen, I've seen it happen. So just consider that. And then the transit. How long is it away? If it's a food product, are you going to need it temperature controlled? That's going to be extra money. All those other things. Is it perishable? And those add costs, of course. So if you've got food product, you might want to keep it closer to home, and you're going into the United States. If you don't have to worry too much about temperature control or it expiring, then maybe shipping beyond North America is something to look at. Myth versus reality. So the myth is that it's overly difficult. I mean, there's the good, the bad, and the ugly. I said at the beginning. So if you listen to the people that are telling the stories, they are going to tell you the horror stories. But a lot of people make a lot of money shipping globally because they take the time that's necessary and they don't rush into it. The key with regulatory affairs is don't allow the money to push you too fast if you're not ready for the market, right? It goes back to compliance. If you're not taking the necessary time and the steps to make sure you're compliant, you will run into issues at some point. And, are you prepared to lose the ability to ship into a country? Probably not. Or lose a shipment. There are some countries in the world that it's against the law to do an advance payment. So if you turn around and you say, or you have somebody who says that they'll send you prepaid for your order, and they send it by an e-transfer, that country's bank will seize it. It's against the law. They can go to jail for that. Right. So there are things that you're not going to know everything, but taking the time to understand which country you're going into and some of the barriers that you might run into is a good approach. And again, usually the people that have a lot of stories are the ones that the stories are where something drastically has happened. But I can tell you that we work with hundreds of companies, startups and seasoned, that are moving hundreds of thousands of dollars every day with no issue. So, you know, the big thing is that you need a business number. You need to have your products at least have their HS code, which is that 6 digits. You can do that on your own. If you want to learn how, send me a quick email. My information's at the end, and I'll direct you on what to look at. You're going to have to figure out if there's regulations for coming into Canada or going back out. So in some cases, you might have to do what's called an export declaration, which is through through an electronic portal saying I'm shipping this out of Canada. And it's a requirement, it's law for certain products. You can't just ship it out. You'd have to check to make sure that if it's regulated or not. And again, there's lists that are out there. The key is if you have your 6-digit HS code, you can usually find out rather quickly if you need to do these other things that I'm talking about. And then we talked about value already. So that's some things to remember. I am looking at the time, Laura. Some successes, of course. You know, I had a coffee manufacturer who exported in 2019, who came to me not from CIBT, but I was that regulatory consultant because they wanted to ship in the United States. Come to find out that every state had a separate regulation that they had to register for. So something that they wanted to turn around and hit all 48 states. In the end, they had to trim that back to 10 states. And so they moved at a much slower pace, but they were able to get their compliance in order so that they could handle expansion on a scale that they were wanting to do. So today they're actually in all 48 states, and they've moved into Europe and Southeastern Asia now. So, you know, they weren't happy when they found out that they had to register their product, but by slowing down, they were able to get compliant, and now they're shipping not by courier, but they're shipping truckloads into the US. So it is, the more you know, the easier it is, of course. And then just because of the time, I'm just going to slide into ATA carnets, my last statement for trade shows. So if you're crossing into the United States or any country and you are bringing a trade show booth, your best bet is to get an ATA carnet, which is called a merchandise passport, which allows you to move into different countries and back out without having to fill out all the paperwork. So I had a customer in New Brunswick who listened to a workshop just like this and ignored me, and then called me on a Saturday to tell me that they were stuck at the border because the CBP officer, Customs Border Patrol in the US, did not accept them putting trade show booth on their form crossing into, that they wanted it itemized, exactly everything that was in that trailer that they were crossing the border. And so they ended up having to, the CBP seized the trailer, and then they had to turn it around, and they had a penalty, and it had to be re-examined. It was a dreadfully long process, and they missed their trade show. But today they're using the ATA carnet because it's still an itemized list of what's in the trailer, but going into the United States, instead of filling out 3 forms, they're filling out 1 form, and they're getting this merchandise passport, which is issued within 5 days and allows you to present it at the border. and gives the customs exactly what's on that trailer without having to have you go through multiple forms. I can tell you from personal experience, it's not worth it. There's a lot of easier ways to do business. And so on that note, I'm going to end there. Just because we're rolling almost at the 1 hour. And I don't know if you guys have any questions. I was trying not to do all the talking, but it's hard in regulatory affairs.
All very valuable information. It really is. Like I'm walking away learning stuff, so.
Yeah, it is, I could spend 4 hours just on how to move food, right? Like it really depends on what it is that you're moving and what the regulations are around that.
Yeah, you did a pretty good overview, I guess, what to expect. And obviously they can contact you with the information you provided for all the specific, I guess, regulatory requirements on products.
Yeah, even if anyone here wants to just bounce some ideas off, you can certainly reach out. And
yeah, I'm going to actually send this recording to those that registered as well. So hopefully that'll provide some referrals your way. Sorry, Diane.
Well, I was just going to ask a general question. We've got people like Monica who are buying items from vendors in the US and probably bringing them in through FedEx or UPS. Is there a general rule of thumb, like when does it make sense to work through a broker? Is there a dollar amount that, geez, if you're bringing in $10,000 a month or $5,000 a month, you should really use a broker?
It usually depends on the regulation side. So if it's being looked at because it's regulated, sometimes having a broker involved is your best bet. Using a UPS and a FedEx or a courier, for that matter, is not an issue. If you were to move, like if I was moving a pallet, a skid of product from the US into Canada using a trucking company, I wouldn't use a courier to move a truckload of something, like a pallet of something. In those cases, the trucking company is not a broker, so I'd have to have a separate broker for that. Usually it's based on that. If it's regulated, you might want to take a look at it. With courier brokers, you have to be very careful with couriers or brokers in general. We're going to just throw them all in the same pot. Sometimes when it's crossing the border, your exporter may have put the right information down. They might have used the right HS code.
Yeah.
But when it's being data entered at the border or through the customs broker that you're using, sometimes there's errors that take place. So if they made an error, you don't look at that, you as the importer of record, the one that's bringing it in, you're the one that gets the penalty from the CRA, the Revenue Canada. So if there's an issue, maybe you're shipping dyes across the border and they categorized it as empty containers. And so an empty container has no duty. But the dye, you should have been given 7% on that, the value of what crossed the border. But because they data entered it wrong, 2 years later, they do an audit and they find out, hey, you actually should have, you get the penalty because you're the importer record. You're obligated under Canadian law to check the paperwork that it's correct.
Mm-hmm.
And that you should be coming up with voluntarily going back to the Revenue Canada and saying, hey, there was a mistake when that thing came in. Bad courier broker or whoever, bad broker for doing that, but I'm on the hook for it. So I need to make sure that it's right, right? A lot of people don't do those checks because A, they don't know what they're looking for. and B, they think, well, it'll be the exporter's fault. If you read our Canadian law, it's actually, as soon as they dub you as the importer of record, any penalties on that are going to come to you. It has nothing to do with the United States, right? So some suppliers in the US don't even have HS codes. They guess, right? And they'll just come up with a code, or they'll just use whatever. That's fine because they can cross the border, but then you're the one that needs to sort of do the due diligence and make sure. So there's no, with a customs broker, and they are listed through the Canadian Custom Broker Society that exists. There's a list of approved, they're licensed. You have to be licensed to be a customs broker. Taking someone from there, you might be paying a little bit more, but if you're having issues with other ways of crossing the border, it might be worth paying someone to make sure that it lands correctly. But usually it's with bigger shipments, right? Not necessarily value, but I always look at the commodity and how you're moving it. If it's by truck, then you're going to have to get a broker anyways, because trucking companies usually don't have the means to have brokerage attached. Some freight forwarders and couriers do have trucking service, but they're not always competitive with just regular trucking, trans-border trucking. So, as an entrepreneur, if you're looking at that, it's risk management at the end of the day, right? So if it's something that you're constantly having to correct because the information that is given is correct, but then it's data entered wrong, because maybe you're using a service that's not their strength, then maybe in those cases, when you weigh it out and say, well, look at all the time I'm spending having to correct this stuff, it might be easier just to pay someone to clear it coming into Canada.
Okay, I have one last question.
Fire away.
If Indigenous people in Canada can buy items tax-free if it's delivered to an address that's on a reserve, does the same hold true for import taxes, duties?
No, I can answer that. I had to pay duties when I ship stuff to the reserve. I feel like it's not related to the land. I guess it's like, I don't know. I had to pay for it when I shipped stuff into the reserve, but maybe Anthony has a different response.
Nope, I don't have much further on that. It's my understanding that coming into Canada is different because it's governed on an international level. So as far as I know, and I would you could talk to an international trade lawyer or someone along those lines, or the CRA. I mean, they're the ones that are ultimately getting that. You can certainly check with them and see if there's any way around that, but that falls under the Customs Act, and the Customs Act doesn't have any clause in there that
it's outside of the Indian Act.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where the tax exemption really falls under.
It's just that there's HST usually assigned. You're paying sales tax and a duty.
Yeah, I guess the sales tax would be the only one that you would be able to get exempted, but not the duty. Like I've had to pay duty when I got stuff shipped in to the reserve when I was on the reserve, but yeah, it's separate anyway.